Hey friends! Around 70% of viewers who watch my videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It would truly mean a lot to me. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps the videos reach more people and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments which city or country are you watching from. I had been on my feet for most of the day and night, hauling speakers, running cables, checking sound levels, fixing small problems before anyone noticed them. The wedding was in a tiny prairie village, the kind of place that looks almost abandoned when you drive through in daylight, let alone at 3 in the morning. One main street, a few side roads, grain elevators standing like quiet guards in the distance, and flat land stretching out so far it makes you feel small. I had driven about 100 kilometers from my city earlier that afternoon, watching the buildings thin out, the lights fade, and the sky get bigger with every mile. By the time the music wound down, my body felt heavy in that dull way that only comes after hours of loud sound and forced alertness. My ears rang softly even after the speakers were powered off. The hall slowly emptied, laughter spilling out into the night as people climbed into cars or wandered off to wherever they were staying. The prairie night was calm, no wind to speak of, just a cool stillness that settled into your bones. The kind of quiet that feels deep rather than empty. I was the last one inside the venue. I double-checked that everything was packed, cords coiled, cases locked. The hall lights were turned off one by one until only the exit sign glowed red behind me. I locked the door, stood there for a second, and breathed out. The parking lot was empty now. My van sat alone under a single light pole, its yellow glow barely reaching the edges of the cracked pavement. I loaded the last case, closed the back doors, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine started with a familiar rumble. The clock on the dash read just after 3 in the morning. I put the headlights on and pulled away, tires crunching softly on gravel as I headed toward the road that would take me back to the highway and then home. Driving through that village at night felt strange. Houses sat dark and silent, curtains drawn, yards still. The road was straight and flat, with fields stretching out on both sides, nothing but black shapes under a sky full of stars. There were no other cars, no movement, just me and the hum of the engine. The radio was off. I liked the quiet after a night like that. It gave my head space to come down from the noise. A few minutes outside the village, as I approached the railway tracks, I noticed something ahead and to my left. At first, it was just a glow, low on the horizon. It was a deep orange color, not flickering like a fire normally does, but smooth and even, like a massive light source hidden behind something. Caught my attention right away because it didn't look right. Out there, the only lights you usually see at night are farmhouses, the occasional yard light, or the distant red blink of a radio tower. This was different, bigger, brighter, steadier. I slowed down without really thinking about it, my foot easing off the gas. The glow seemed to be coming from the other side of a low ridge, beyond the railway tracks. The tracks ran straight across the land, slightly raised, and the ridge rose gently on the far side. The light was spilling up into the sky from behind it, painting the low clouds and dust in a wide orange smear. My first thought was that it had to be a bonfire. Weddings out there often turned into after-parties somewhere away from town, and people liked big fires. But this seemed too big for that. It was wide, stretching across a huge section of the horizon, and the color was too uniform. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I had never seen a light like that before, especially out there, in the middle of nowhere. Instead of turning toward the highway, I kept going straight, heading for the crossing. The road curved slightly and climbed as it approached the tracks. As I drove up and over them, the suspension of the van creaked softly. On the other side, the road continued uphill for another kilometer or two before cresting the ridge. The whole time, the orange glow stayed in the same place relative to the ridge. It didn't flare or dim. It didn't flicker. It just sat there, calm and massive, like a distant sunrise that didn't belong at that hour. When I reached the top of the ridge, I expected the source of the light to be right there, just beyond the crest. I half expected to see flames, trucks, people, something. Instead, when the road leveled out, the light was still far off on the horizon. It hadn't gotten closer at all. If anything, it looked exactly the same as it had from the village. That should have been the moment I turned around, but instead I kept driving. There was a strange pull to it, not in a dramatic or mystical way, but in a very human, very simple way. I wanted to understand what I was seeing. The land out there is open and honest. You see what there is. This felt like something that didn't fit. I drove for a few more kilometers, the road cutting straight through fields that were dark and quiet. My headlights swept over grass and fence posts, over the occasional farm access road. The orange glow stayed ahead of me, never getting larger, never revealing its source. It felt like chasing something that didn't want to be reached. The longer I drove, the more aware I became of how alone I was. There was no cell service out there, no houses nearby, no traffic. If something went wrong, it would be a long wait before anyone came by. The glow, which had first felt interesting, started to feel wrong. Not dangerous in an obvious way, but unsettling. It was too quiet. There was no sound of wind, no distant noise of activity, no signs of life around that light. Just a huge, steady orange presence sitting in the darkness. I thought about what could cause something like that. Industrial fires, gas flares, something burning on a massive scale. None of those were things I wanted to get close to in the middle of the night with no warning or protection. I imagined getting too near and finding the road blocked, or worse, the ground unstable or toxic smoke drifting in ways I couldn't see. I slowed down again and finally stopped. I sat there with the engine idling, headlights cutting a bright tunnel through the darkness, the glow still hovering far ahead. I felt tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. The kind of tired that makes your judgment softer, your decisions slower. That was when I decided it wasn't worth it. Whatever it wasn't a bonfire, and it wasn't something I needed to see up close. I turned the van around, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, and headed back the way I had come. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror more than once. The orange glow stayed there, behind me now, still just as large, still just as steady. It didn't shrink as quickly as I expected. It lingered in the mirror, like a low sun refusing to set. The road back toward the village felt longer than before. Every small sound from the van made me tense. The hum of the tires, the rattle of gear in the back, the engine's steady drone. My mind kept going back to the light, the way it had filled the sky without any sound, the way it hadn't behaved like a normal fire. When I reached the turn that led toward the main highway, I felt a small sense of relief. That road was familiar. It was wider, better maintained, and eventually it would put me back into the flow of other vehicles, back into the world I understood. I drove for about 50 kilometers, the highway stretching straight ahead, reflective markers flashing past in a steady rhythm. The sky began to lighten just a little in the east, not with color, but with a thinning of the black. The night was slowly giving way to morning. At one point, I pulled over onto the shoulder. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I needed to stretch. Maybe I needed to check something in the back. Or maybe I just needed to look again. I stepped out of the van, the cold air hitting my face, and turned around to face the direction I had come from. Even from that far away, the orange glow was still there. It sat low in the sky, just as wide, just as bright as it had been back in the village. Distance hadn't softened it at all. If anything, seeing it from so far away made it feel even bigger. It wasn't local. It wasn't small. It was something massive, something that dominated the land. I stood there for a long moment, hands in my pockets, staring at it. There was no fear in the sharp sense, no panic. Just a deep, uneasy feeling, like looking at something too large to fully understand. The prairie around me was silent, the road empty, the world reduced to me, my van, and that distant firelight. Eventually, I got back in and kept driving. The closer I got to the city, the more normal things became. More cars, streetlights, buildings. The orange glow faded behind me, swallowed by distance and the curve of the earth. When I finally got home, the sun was rising. I unloaded just enough to secure my gear and then collapsed into bed. my body giving up all at once. Sleep came fast and heavy. I woke up later that day with the image of that light still burned into my mind. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt solid and real, like something unfinished. I made coffee and sat at the table, scrolling through the news on my phone. That was when I saw it. An article about a massive fire in the countryside, not far from where I had been. Underground natural gas storage tanks had ruptured and ignited. The fire was so intense and so dangerous that there was nothing to do but let it burn. Emergency crews had evacuated the immediate area and set up a wide perimeter. The flames were visible from over 100 kilometers away. It would take days for the fuel to burn off completely. Photos showed a towering column of fire and smoke, bright orange against the dark sky. In some shots, the flames looked smooth and steady, almost unreal, lighting up the land for miles around. As I read more, the pieces fell into place. The location matched. The timing matched. The description matched exactly what I had seen. That was the light. That was what had been sitting on the horizon, calling attention to itself without a sound. I sat there for a long time after reading, thinking about how close I had come to driving straight toward it. How easy it would have been to keep going, to push a little farther out of curiosity or stubbornness. How different the night could have ended if I had. There was no mystery left once I knew what it was, but the feeling remained. The memory of that quiet, powerful glow sitting in the darkness, drawing my eyes and my thoughts toward it. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't impossible. It was just the raw force of something real and dangerous, happening out of sight, larger than my understanding in that moment. In the days that followed, the news kept covering it. The fire burned for 3 or 4 days, a controlled disaster in the open prairie. Crews monitored it, waiting for it to exhaust itself. Eventually, it did. The glow faded. The land went dark again. Life went on. I went back to work. I drove past fields and ridges that looked just like the ones from that night. But every time I'm out there after dark now, and I see an unexpected light on the horizon, my foot eases off the gas without me thinking about it. I remember how that fire looked calm and distant, how it didn't rush or roar, how it simply existed with a quiet strength. I understand now how something like that can pull you in, not with noise or chaos, but with stillness, with the promise of understanding if you just go a little closer. And I know that sometimes, turning around and leaving something unexplained for the night is the safest ending you can give yourself. When I was a teenager, I was not right in the head in the way teenagers usually are. I was quiet, spent a lot of time alone, and had this idea that fear was something you could train against like a muscle. I lived in a small rural town where the forests pressed up close to the houses, dark lines of trees climbing the hills and stretching into the mountains. During the day, those woods felt familiar. I had walked them since I was a kid, learned the paths, the dips in the ground, the smell of pine needles and damp soil. At night, they became something else entirely, and that was exactly why I went there. I used to take night walks on purpose. Not with friends, not with music in my ears, not with a flashlight. I would wait until late, when the town lights thinned out and the street lamps stopped, and then I would step onto the forest paths where there was nothing but darkness. My logic at the time felt solid to me. If I could walk through fear and come out the other side, I would feel stronger. I told myself that nothing was actually there, that it was just my mind making noise. Every time my heart raced and nothing happened, I felt proud, like I had won something. Those walks became a habit. I learned how the darkness worked. At first it felt total, like a wall, but after a few minutes my eyes would adjust. I could see vague shapes, the pale strip of the path, the deeper black of trees on either side. I listened to my own breathing and footsteps. I listened to the forest breathing back. Wind through branches, leaves shifting, insects clicking, sometimes the sudden crash of something small running away through undergrowth. All normal sounds, I told myself. All harmless. I liked the moment when fear peaked and then slowly faded. That moment when my shoulders dropped and I realized I was still alive, still walking. It gave me a strange calm. I felt separate from other people my age, like I had found some secret test they were too afraid to take. Looking back now, I understand how stupid that thinking was, but at the time it felt like control. The night everything changed started like any other. It was late, well past midnight. The sky was overcast, no moon, no stars. The kind of night where even the open areas felt closed in. I left my house quietly and walked through the last stretch of road where the lights still worked. Beyond that point, the forest path began, a narrow dirt trail used by hikers during the day. At night, it was just a cut through darkness. As soon as I stepped under the trees, the temperature dropped. The air felt thicker, heavier in my lungs. I remember noticing how quiet it was. Not silent, but muted, like the forest was holding its breath. My footsteps sounded louder than usual. Each step felt deliberate, placed carefully on ground I could not fully see. I walked deeper, following the path by memory more than sight. The trees closed in on both sides, tall trunks rising into nothing. The smell of wet earth was strong. I kept my hands loose at my sides, trying to look relaxed even though there was no one to see me. That was part of the game I played with myself. Act calm and the fear would follow. After a while, my thoughts started to wander, as they always did. I thought about school, about how tired I was of feeling awkward and out of place. I thought about how good it would feel when I got home, when I could say to myself that I had done it again. I barely noticed how dark it had gotten until I realized I could not see much at all anymore. The path was still there, but only as a faint lighter shape under my feet. I slowed down slightly, more cautious now. I told myself I had gone this far before. I told myself I was fine. Then it happened. I did not see him until the very last moment. 1 second I was walking, and the next I was colliding with something solid. A body. Person. My shoulder hit his chest or arm, and there was this sudden, overwhelming sense of presence right in front of me. Not a shadow, not a shape, but a human being where I expected nothing. My brain did not take time to think. My body reacted on its own. A scream tore out of me, loud and raw, cutting through the forest. I turned and ran. I did not look back. I ran the way animals run when they panic, without any plan except away. My feet slipped on the dirt. My lungs burned instantly. My heart slammed so hard it felt like it might break my ribs. Branches slapped my arms and face as I tore down the path. The darkness seemed thicker now, more hostile. Behind me, I heard footsteps. They were not echoes of my own. They were separate, heavier. The sound of someone else running on the same path. Each footfall landed slightly out of sync with mine, close enough that my stomach dropped in terror. Whoever I had run into was chasing me. My mind exploded with thoughts all at once. I imagined hands grabbing me from behind. I imagined being dragged off the path into the trees. I imagined never being found. The word serial killer flashed through my head, bright and horrifying. At that age, that was the worst thing I could imagine. The explanation my fear latched onto immediately. I pushed myself harder. My legs screamed in protest. My breath came in sharp gasps that tore at my throat. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, could feel sweat breaking out across my skin despite the cold air. Every instinct told me to scream again, but I knew it would only waste breath. The path twisted and dipped. I nearly fell once, catching myself just in time. The footsteps behind me stayed close. Sometimes they sounded right on top of me, sometimes a little farther back, but they never stopped. The rhythm of them became a nightmare drumbeat that drove me forward. I had never run like that before. Not ever. Fear stripped everything else away. There was no pride, no test, no facing fear anymore. There was only survival. After what felt like forever but was probably only minutes, something changed. The footsteps began to fade. Not all at once, but gradually. The space between them and me grew larger. The sound softened, became less sharp. I did not slow down. I did not trust it. I just kept running, forcing my legs to move even when they felt numb. I ran until my chest felt like it was going to explode. I ran until my vision narrowed and spots danced in front of my eyes. I ran past the point where the trees started to thin, past the first hint of distant light. Only when I reached the edge of the forest path and stumbled onto the road did I finally stop. I bent over with my hands on my knees, gasping, saliva dripping from my mouth, my whole body shaking. The quiet of the road felt unreal after the chaos of the forest. There were no footsteps behind me now, no movement, just me, alone under a broken street lamp flickering weak yellow light. I straightened slowly and looked back toward the trees. The forest edge stared back at me, dark and still. Nothing moved. Nothing stepped out. It was as if the woods had swallowed everything that had just happened. I stood there for a long time, listening, my ears strained for any sound, any sign that someone was still there. All I heard was my own breathing slowly calming and the faint hum of electricity from the street lamp. Eventually, I walked home. I did not run anymore. Every step felt unreal, like I was floating just above the ground. When I got inside, I locked the door behind me, something I had never bothered with before. I sat on my bed fully dressed, heart still racing, replaying the moment over and over in my head. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that collision again. The solid shock of another body in the dark. The sound of footsteps chasing me. I imagined what would have happened if I had frozen instead of run, if I had tripped and fallen, if he had been faster. In the days that followed, I avoided the forest completely. Even during daylight, I felt uneasy near the tree line. My friends noticed I stopped talking about my night walks. I never told anyone what happened in detail. Saying it out loud made it feel too real. Over time, the sharp edge of fear dulled, but it never went away completely. It changed shape. Instead of raw panic, it became a constant awareness of how wrong I had been. How careless. Years later, as an adult, I can look back at that night with a clearer head. I have replayed it so many times that the memory feels worn smooth, but the core of it is still there. I know now that the most likely explanation is also the simplest one. The forests around my town were patrolled at night. Rangers checked trails for fires, for lost hikers, for illegal activity. Someone walking alone without a light at that hour would have been suspicious. I imagine him now as a man doing his job, startled just as badly as I was when I ran into him in the dark. I imagine him reacting on instinct too, giving chase because someone screaming and running in the middle of the night looks like guilt or danger. I imagine him stopping once he realized I was just a scared kid, or once I got far enough that continuing did not make sense. That explanation fits. It makes the world feel ordered again, but it does not erase the feeling of that night. It does not change the fact that in the dark, with no context, no words, no faces, I experienced pure terror. For those few minutes, the forest was not a place to test myself. It was a place that showed me how small and vulnerable I really was. I never went on another night forest walk after that. Not once. The habit ended completely, not slowly, not with excuses, but all at once. The idea of facing fear lost its appeal when I understood how thin the line was between fear and real danger. I did not need to prove anything to myself anymore. Even now, when I walk through forests during the day, I am more careful. I notice how quickly light fades under thick trees. I notice how sound behaves differently in the open compared to undercover. I think about how easy it is for two people to exist in the same space without seeing each other until it is too late. That night taught me something I could not have learned any other way. Fear is not always something to be conquered. Sometimes it is a warning, and ignoring it does not make you brave. It just makes you lucky if you survive. I was lucky. That is the clear ending I live with. I ran into someone in the dark. I panicked. I was chased, and I got away. Nothing supernatural. No mystery that needs to stay open. Just a real human moment in a place that does not care who you are. And that was enough to change me forever. I was 11, maybe 12, when the woods still felt like they belonged to me. Back then, my world was small in the right ways and endless in the ways that mattered. Our town sat low in a bowl of hills, with long lines of trees rising up behind the houses like a dark wall. From my backyard, you could walk straight into them, and once you were in, it felt like the trees went on forever. I never once found an edge. No fence, no road, no clear break. Just trees folding into more trees. Hills turning into other hills, rocks and creeks and deadfall layered over each other like the woods were building themselves deeper every year. It was the 80s, and kids were still allowed to vanish for whole days without anyone calling the police. School would let out for summer and Alex and I would be gone by morning. We packed sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, cans of soda that clanked together in our bags, and whatever junk food we could sneak out without our moms noticing. We carried cheap compasses, dull survival knives our parents bought us because they trusted us, and dumb little army surplus things that made us feel tougher than we were. Helmets that didn't fit right, old canteens that smelled like metal and mold, camo jackets 2 sizes too big. Alex lived 3 houses down. He was taller than me and louder, always moving, always daring me to go further. I was the one who noticed things. Sounds, changes, little details that didn't line up. Together we balanced each other out. We played war, army, cowboys, anything that involved sneaking and hiding and taking territory. We dug shallow trenches and named them bases. We built forts out of fallen branches and plastic tarps. We burned little cooking fires and heated up cans of beans like we were surviving some great disaster. My parents knew where we were most days. They could hear us if they stood at the edge of the yard and listened hard enough. Sometimes my dad came with us deeper in, especially if we wanted to camp. He liked the woods too, but in a quieter way. He showed us how to hang food high so animals wouldn't get it, how to look for dead branches before setting a tent, how to read the ground for tracks. He trusted us, and because of that we took ourselves seriously. Most of the woods we knew well. We had paths that weren't paths, routes worn into our heads from walking them so many times. But there were still places we hadn't seen, pockets where the land got rougher, steeper, more broken. One day, late summer, the air already starting to cool at night, Alex suggested we push farther than usual. We started early, just after dawn. The sky pale and clean, the ground wet with dew. We moved fast, laughing, racing each other up slopes and over rocks, stopping only to drink soda and throw pebbles into creeks. The farther we went, the quieter it got. Not silent, just different. Fewer birds. The trees closer together. The ground uneven in a way that made your ankles ache. Time stretched. What felt like an hour turned into 2. The sun climbed higher, but the light barely reached the forest floor. I remember thinking we should mark our way back somehow, but pride kept me quiet. We were explorers. We knew what we were doing. That was when we saw it. At first, it didn't register as anything strange. Just wood shapes where wood shapes already were. Then my brain caught up and my stomach dropped. There was a platform high up in a tree, way higher than anything we had built. 30 feet at least. Planks nailed clean and straight. A small deck with a railing. A door set into the trunk side, framed like someone knew how to do real carpentry. It looked old but solid, gray wood darkened by years of weather. No ladder. No obvious way up. We stood there a long time, necks craned back, hearts hammering. Felt like we had stumbled into someone else's secret place. A castle, a lookout, proof that the woods still had things hidden from us. I felt thrilled and uneasy at the same time, like finding a locked room in your own house. We ran most of the way home. I talked so fast my jaw hurt. Alex kept interrupting me. We tripped over each other's words at dinner, barely eating, barely breathing between sentences. My dad listened, asked questions, nodded. He took us to the army surplus store that night. Rope, good rope, thick, heavy. We planned it all out in our heads like engineers. We barely slept. We were back in the woods before the sun was fully up. The air smelled like leaves and dirt and cold. Our packs were heavier this time. Rope coiled tight, knives on our hips, sandwiches smashed but intact. The hike felt longer going back. The hills steeper. The excitement pressed down on me until it felt hard to breathe. When we reached the treehouse again, it looked even bigger, even higher, like it had grown overnight. We worked for hours. We cut thick sticks and tied them across the rope to make rungs. My fingers burned and my palms went raw. The knots weren't pretty, but they held. We threw the rope over a branch near the deck again and again until it finally caught. The rope ladder swayed when we pulled it tight, creaking softly. Standing at the base, looking up, I felt a flicker of doubt. This wasn't like our forts. This was real. This belonged to someone. But the feeling was drowned out by pride and curiosity. We played rock, paper, scissors to decide who would climb first. Alex won. He climbed fast, strong, barely looking down. When he reached the deck, he hesitated, then opened the door and stepped inside. He came back out almost immediately. His face was wrong, pale. His mouth hung open like he had forgotten how to close it. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. He climbed down too fast, almost slipping. He wanted to go home. That scared me more than anything else could have. Alex didn't scare easy. I told him to wait, that I had to see. I climbed up, slower than he had, my hands shaking despite myself. The wood smelled old and damp. The door creaked when I opened it. Inside, the air felt dead, stale. The space was small, maybe 8 feet by 8, tall enough to stand in the middle. Light came in through cracks between the boards, and every inch of the walls was covered. Photographs, magazine pages, stapled neatly, overlapping, layered. Faces and bodies that did not belong there. Children, some younger than me, some around my age, posed, exposed, smiling in ways that made my skin crawl. The images were not torn or hidden or messy. They were arranged carefully like decorations, like trophies. My brain refused to process it at first. I remember noticing small things instead. Rust on the staples, a faint chemical smell from the photos, dust on the floor, footprints that weren't ours. Then it all hit me at once, heavy and crushing. My throat closed, my stomach lurched. I backed out without really seeing how. I don't remember climbing down. I remember running. We didn't stop until we hit the edge of the neighborhood. Lungs burning, legs shaking. At home, everything felt too normal. The house too bright, the walls too clean. My dad's face changed when we told him. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question. He picked up the phone. The police officer who came later felt wrong from the start. He asked where it was, how we got up there, where the rope came from. He kept circling back to the rope. His voice sharpened when he asked if we had taken anything, if we had touched anything, if we had taken pictures down. My dad shut that down fast. The officer left with our statement and a promise to follow up. Life changed after that. We weren't banned from the woods, but the freedom was gone. Time limits, check-ins, no overnights. The deep parts of the forest became off-limits in ways that weren't written down but were understood. Alex and I built a long tin phone, stretching wire between trees, so we could still wander a bit and be heard if needed. It helped, but it wasn't the same. The woods felt watched now, tainted. Time moved on the way it always does. School, new interests, trouble. A couple years later, that same officer stopped us in another park. He caught me with a joint. He lectured, took it, let us go. Alex asked about the treehouse. The officer brushed it off, said nothing useful, drove away. Years passed. We grew up. We moved on. The woods faded into memory, something I thought about only when I smelled damp leaves or saw a rope coiled just right. In college, Alex emailed me late one night. He had read something in the state paper. The officer, dead, a gunshot wound, ruled a suicide after his wife discovered he had been circulating child pornography. The pieces clicked together with a sickening clarity. The treehouse, the questions, the rope, the way he had looked at us like we were a problem to be managed, not kids to be protected. A few months later, Alex emailed again. He had gone to an estate auction, just to see. Among the items listed was a rope ladder with a bag. That was the moment it fully settled in. We hadn't found some random horror hidden in the woods. We had found the center of it. Place built carefully, maintained, used. Close enough to town to reach, far enough to stay hidden. We had walked into it by accident, 2 kids chasing adventure. I still think about how long it had been there. How many times we had passed near it without knowing. How many times someone had climbed that ladder and shut that door. The woods didn't change after that, but my understanding of them did. They were no longer just a place of freedom and play. They were proof that evil didn't need ghosts or monsters or shadows. It could build something solid and quiet and wait. I never went back to that spot. I don't know if the treehouse was ever taken down. Part of me hopes it rotted and fell on its own. Boards splitting, photos scattered and ruined by rain and time. Part of me knows that doesn't erase what happened there. I grew up. I left town. I built a life that looks nothing like those days. But sometimes, when I think about being 11, about how big the world felt and how safe I believed it was, I remember that door. I remember the walls. And I remember how fast childhood ended the moment I stepped inside and saw what an adult had hidden. Not in some dark fantasy place, but in the woods I thought belonged to me. I am writing this now because time has softened the sharpest edges, but it has not erased anything. It never did. Life moved on around it, people married and divorced and had kids and careers. Music tastes shifted a little but not enough, and years stacked up quietly. What stayed the same was the feeling in my stomach when I let my mind go back there. It is the same heavy, sour weight, like something spoiled that never gets thrown away. Alex and I were kids when it happened. We were inseparable then, the kind of friends who showed up at each other's houses without calling, who shared headphones and dirty jokes we barely understood, who planned futures that made sense only to kids who thought time was endless. Later we grew into metal and punk, loud music that felt honest and raw, music that made room for anger without asking you to explain it. We grew up together and then, slowly, we didn't. Now he wears suits and sends me emails a few times a year, links to things he thinks I will like, photos from concerts, updates about another kid, another move. We never talk about what happened. We never named it out loud to each other. It just sits there between us like a piece of furniture neither of us wants to bump into. Back then our town was small in a way that made adults feel safe. Everyone knew everyone. Houses had yards that bled into each other without fences. Kids rode bikes until dark and came home when the streetlights came on. Parents believed in community. They believed in uniforms and badges and titles. They believed that if a man coached a team or led scouts or taught workshops, he must be good. They believed that bad things came from far away, not from the center of town. The treehouse was not ours. It sat on the edge of a wooded lot behind a neat house with a deep green lawn. It was built well, solid boards, a rope ladder that didn't sway too much, a little window cut into one wall. It looked like the kind of place every kid wanted, the kind of place parents pointed to and smiled. We had wandered back there because wandering was what we did. There was no plan. We were curious and bored and free. I climbed first. I remember the smell of old wood and leaves, the way my hands felt gritty from the rope. When I pulled myself up and swung my leg over, the inside of the treehouse was dim. Light came in through the window in a thin slice. Took a second for my eyes to adjust. Alex followed me up, his shoes thumping softly behind me. There was a box in the corner. Cardboard, taped shut and then torn open again. It did not belong in a kid's fort. It was too plain, too adult. I knelt beside it because that is what kids do when they see something hidden. Inside were pictures. Not many, but enough. Loose, curled at the edges. Polaroids. At that age, my entire understanding of nudity came from a single magazine image I had seen once and could never forget. This was different. These pictures were not something I had words for. I will not describe what was in them. I do not need to. What mattered was the faces, the expressions, the way fear and confusion sat there, trapped on glossy paper. These were not moments of joy or play. They were moments stolen. Something bad had happened just before and just after the shutter clicked. I understood that much even then. I remember my chest feeling tight. I remember a heat in my face, a rush that made me dizzy. I remember wanting to put the pictures back in the box and tape it shut and climb down and pretend we had never been there. I remember knowing that pretending would not make it go away. I remember feeling sick. We did not stay long. I think it was 5 minutes. Felt longer because fear stretches time. When we climbed down, my legs felt weak. The yard looked the same as it always had. The house was quiet. Birds moved in the trees. Everything looked normal, which felt wrong. Adults got involved. Things moved fast after that in ways kids do not fully see. Names were said. Police cars came and went. The treehouse was closed off. The box disappeared. The town buzzed with rumors that were whispered and then swallowed when kids walked by. The man it led to was someone everyone knew. A cop, a husband, a father, a man who taught kids about birds and cameras, who led trips and wore smiles that parents trusted. When he was found dead, the story shifted again. Words like tragedy and shock and unthinkable floated through the air. People talked about his service, his family. They talked about how this could not be who he really was. I read everything I could find. Old habits die hard. I wanted to understand how something like that could exist in the same space as picnics and workshops and uniforms. I learned that there was not much found in his house. Not piles of evidence like people imagine now. This was before digital hoards, before endless storage. Things were physical then, passed hand to hand, hidden in boxes. His wife let the police in. Then she took her kids and left town. Just like that, they were gone, erased from daily life. School went on. Summer ended. We got older. The town tried to heal by forgetting. People avoided the lot where the treehouse had been. Eventually it was taken down. The wood was hauled away. Grass grew back. New families moved in who had no idea what had happened there. Kids played again. Alex and I did not talk about it. Not then. Not later. It became one of those shared memories that sit under everything else. We talked about bands, about girls, about plans. We pretended we were normal kids with normal worries. Sometimes I would catch him looking off into space, his jaw tight. Sometimes he would catch me doing the same. We never said why. As adults, we drifted apart the way people do. Distance, work, families. We stayed connected enough to remember each other as we were. The emails are friendly and light. They never touch the past. We both know better. What stayed with me was not just the images. It was the lesson. How easily evil can wear a familiar face. How little kids are asked to trust. How a town can look safe and be rotten in one small, hidden place. It changed how I see people. It changed how I listen to my instincts. It made me careful in a way I never was before. There were years when I did not think about it much. Life filled up with other things. Work deadlines, bills, relationships that failed and taught me new kinds of disappointment. But then something small would trigger it. A news story, a familiar smell of old wood, the sight of a treehouse in someone's yard. My stomach would drop and I would be back there, kneeling on dusty boards, holding something I should never have seen. I never told many people. When I did, I kept it vague. I did not want to pass the weight on. I did not want to relive it in detail. Some things are better carried quietly. Some things do not need an audience. As I got older, I thought more about the kids in those pictures. Not what happened to them after, but who they might have become. I wondered if they remembered, if their lives were shaped by it the way mine was. I hoped they found some peace. I hoped they were believed. The ending of this is not dramatic. There is no twist. No sudden revelation years later. The man is dead. The town moved on. Alex and I live our separate lives. The treehouse is gone. What remains is memory and the knowledge that bad things do not announce themselves. They hide in plain sight, in respected roles, in quiet corners. I am older now. I am more careful with the trust one give. I pay attention when something feels off. I do not look away when my stomach tightens. That is what the ending is. Not closure, not healing in a neat way, but awareness. I walked away from that treehouse changed, even if I did not understand it then. I carry that change with me still. It is heavy, but it keeps my eyes open. I am writing this down because I finally understand that pretending something never happened does not make it disappear. It only lets it rot quietly, and rot spreads. When Alex replied to me with all that information, it felt like something old and buried finally cracked open. I had sent the message without thinking much would come of it. We barely talk anymore. We grew up together and then grew apart in the boring way most people do. No fight, no big fallout, just time and different lives. When I saw his reply pop up so fast, it stopped me cold. I was sitting at my desk after work, still wearing my boots, staring at the screen like it was going to accuse me of something. I read his message slowly. Then I read it again. Then a third time. Each pass made my stomach feel heavier. The facts were not dramatic on their own. No wild claims. No exaggeration. Just pieces laid out in a careful way, like someone afraid to disturb them too much. He even asked me to leave out certain details if I ever talked about it. Not because he was protecting himself, but because he knew how wide the ripples could go. He has always been that way. Careful. Thoughtful. Even as a kid, he was the one who stopped to think when I just kept moving. We grew up in a rural place where woods were not something special. They were just there, surrounding everything. You learned the trails the same way you learned back roads. We were in the forest constantly. After school, on weekends, during summer. It was where we felt free. No parents. No teachers. Just dirt, trees, and the sound of your own breathing when you walked uphill. We built forts. We climbed trees. We pretended we were tougher and smarter than we were. That treehouse was not ours. That is important. We did not build it. We found it one afternoon when we went farther than usual. It was old even then, not falling apart but not new. The boards were weathered gray. The nails were rusted. It sat higher than anything we would have bothered to build ourselves. Whoever made it knew what they were doing. It was sturdy, quiet, hidden in a way that did not feel accidental. At the time, it just felt like a cool find, a secret place someone else had abandoned. We went up there a few times. We never stayed long. It smelled wrong. Not like rot or animals. Just stale and heavy. We joked about it being creepy, but kids joke about everything. We did not understand what we were reacting to. Then we found the shoebox. I have replayed that moment in my head more times than I can count. The light coming through the leaves. The dust in the air. The way my hands felt when I picked it up. It was tucked away, not hidden carefully, but not out in the open either. Inside were things that did not belong in the woods. Things that did not belong anywhere a kid should find. I will not list them. I do not need to. The feeling they gave me is enough. It was confusion first, then fear, then something like shame even though we had done nothing wrong. We did not know what to do. We were not brave. We were not heroes. We were kids who wanted to go home and forget what we saw. So we did what kids do. We put it back. We left. We told ourselves it was none of our business. We never went back. Life moved on. High school, jobs, relationships. We talked less and less. The woods stayed where they were. The memory stayed where it was too packed away and avoided. Then the deputy died. Everyone knew him. That kind of man always makes sure of that. He was friendly in a way that felt practiced, helpful, always around. He wore his authority lightly, like it was just another tool. People trusted him. Parents trusted him. I trusted him without ever really thinking about it. When the news broke, it was sudden. An accident, they said. Then whispers. Then more. Things that did not make sense at first. Searches. Interviews. The treehouse was torn down not long after. I remember driving past the edge of the woods and seeing equipment there, the area disturbed in a way it never had been. It made my chest feel tight, but I still did nothing. I told myself it was too late. I told myself someone else would handle it. I told myself I was just a dumb kid back then. Alex learned more than I did. His parents were interviewed because of his brother. His brother had been in Scouts. That alone shifted something in my head. I had always seen that organization through our own lens, shaped by how much we disliked his brother. He was awkward, a tryhard, someone we made fun of because that was easier than understanding him. Nothing came of the interview. His brother said everything had been fine. The parents did not even mention it to Alex at the time. Years went by. Alex told me the treehouse was estimated to be around 16 years old, older than we were when we found it. That detail hit me harder than most. It meant it had been there quietly, serving its purpose, long before we ever stumbled across it. It also meant that when we walked away, it did not end, kept going. There was a road not far past it, just another hour of walking. That fact feels like a personal insult from the universe. If we had kept going, if we had pushed a little farther, we would have seen it. A way in, a way out, something solid we could have pointed to. Instead, the treehouse stayed suspended in our minds as something unreal, disconnected from normal life. Alex told me there was no proof that would stand up in court about photographs. The deputy had a good camera setup, a darkroom, albums spanning decades, nothing direct, nothing that could be used cleanly. He was careful. That word comes up again and again when I think about it. Careful enough to build something that lasted. Careful enough to avoid leaving what mattered most. He took trips alone. Bird-watching weekends, 2 or 3 a year. That detail seems small until you sit with it. Until you imagine the planning, the excuses, the confidence that no one would question it. He was training other deputies. He was lined up to be sheriff. He would have won. I believe that completely. The kind of man who can do what he did for so long without being stopped is the kind of man people believe in. Alex even told me about getting caught with alcohol and a girl in his car by that same man. How he asked about the treehouse then too. The question was always there, hovering. He still got in trouble. That detail stuck with me because it shows how separate those worlds were. The authority, the secrets, the normal rules applied only where they were convenient. The deputy's wife and kids changed their names and moved away. I think about them sometimes, about what they must have learned, about how much of their lives had to be burned down so they could start again. That kind of ending is not clean. It never is. Alex said he never wanted to talk about what we found because it made him feel guilty. Guilty for not doing more. Guilty for being a kid who chose fun and fear over responsibility. When other things started coming out later, he stayed quiet. He became a lawyer. He learned exactly how much hindsight can hurt. How easy it is to say what should have been done when you are standing on the other side of time. When I finished reading his message, I sat there for a long time. The office was quiet. Outside, the world was normal. Cars passed. Lights turned on in other buildings. Nothing reflected the weight sitting in my chest. That is the scariest part of all of it. How normal everything looks when something terrible has been allowed to exist just out of sight. I drove home and did something I had avoided for years. I looked up the area. Satellite images. Old maps. I traced the trails we used to walk. I saw how close that road really was. How thin the line was between what we knew and what we did not. I could almost feel the ground under my feet again. The way the forest closed in around you the farther you went. The way sound changed. I did not sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the smell in the treehouse. About how we laughed it off. About how easy it is to tell yourself you are powerless when you are scared. I thought about how many times that man must have walked those woods with complete confidence. How the uniform protected him even when he was not wearing it. This story does not end with justice. It does not end with a dramatic reveal or a heroic act. It ends with understanding, and that is heavier in some ways. The treehouse is gone. The man is dead. The evidence is scattered or destroyed or locked away in memories like mine and Alex's. Nothing we do now can change what happened then. But I know this much clearly now. Silence is not neutral. Walking away is a choice. Being a kid explains why we did what we did, but it does not erase the consequences of it. I cannot go back and be braver. I cannot make different choices in that moment. What I can do is refuse to pretend it was just a creepy story from my childhood. The woods are still there. People still walk them. Kids still wander farther than they should. Evil does not announce itself with monsters or ghosts or anything unreal. It looks like a helpful man with a plan for the future. It hides in plain structures that seem abandoned until you look closer. It depends on people telling themselves it is none of their business. I am older now. I understand how fragile the idea of safety really is. I understand how much harm can be done quietly, patiently, over years. Writing this does not fix anything. It does not bring closure in a clean way, but it draws a line. It says that what happened was real, that it mattered, that the fear we felt in that treehouse was our instincts trying to save us, and maybe others too. The ending is simple and ugly and true. We found something bad. We did nothing. Life went on. The truth came out in pieces, too late to help the people who needed it most. The woods did not swallow the secret. People did. And now that I see that clearly, I know I will never walk past something like that again and tell myself it is none of my business. I still remember that night with a kind of sharp clarity that only comes from fear. Even though it happened around 15 years ago, the details never faded. They stayed with me, sitting somewhere deep in my head, coming back in flashes whenever I drive at night on unfamiliar roads or pass a place that feels too empty. This is something that really happened, and the reason it stuck with me is because it felt so close to becoming something much worse. We had gone out of the city that day to look at a house. It was one of those half-serious, half-curious trips where my parents just wanted to see what was out there. The city had been growing fast, and people kept talking about land and houses outside the main area. We drove for hours, slowly leaving behind streetlights, shops, and traffic. The roads narrowed, the buildings thinned out, and soon everything around us was open land. The countryside out there was not the kind you see in postcards. It was dry and neglected. Tall grass grew everywhere, uneven and wild, bending in the wind. Dead trees stood in random places, their branches thin and bare, looking like black arms reaching into the sky. The ground was dusty, and the roads were nothing more than dirt paths that twisted and crossed each other without any clear signs. Even during the day it felt lonely, but by the time we started heading back, the sun was already low. Night came fast. One moment the sky was orange and purple, and the next it was dark. There were no streetlights at all. The only light came from the headlights of my father's Nissan Primera, cutting two narrow paths through the darkness. Everything beyond those beams felt hidden and unknown. The car hummed steadily, the tires crunching over gravel and dirt. Inside, it was quiet in that tired way families get after a long day. There was no GPS back then, no phone apps, no calm voice telling you when to turn. My father relied on memory, instinct, and whatever road signs he could find. But out there, signs were rare, and when they did appear, they were often old, rusted, or pointing in confusing directions. Every few minutes we reached another crossroad, each one looking almost the same as the last. For dirt paths meeting in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by grass and trees that looked dead even in the dark. I remember the feeling of being lost sinking in slowly. At first it was almost funny. We had taken a wrong turn, that was all. But as the minutes turned into longer stretches of driving with no familiar landmarks, that feeling changed. The air inside the car felt heavier. My father leaned forward slightly over the steering wheel, focused, scanning the road ahead. My mother looked out the window, trying to recognize anything at all. My brother and I sat quietly in the back, watching shadows move past us. The countryside at night has a strange sound to it. There is no constant noise like in the city. No traffic, no distant voices. Just the low sound of the engine, the tires on dirt, and sometimes the wind pushing through the tall grass. Every now and then, something rustled nearby, probably an animal, but in the dark it always made my stomach tighten a little. We kept driving like that, crossroads after crossroads, each one adding to the feeling that we were going deeper instead of finding our way out. Then, as we approached another intersection, something appeared in the headlights ahead. First, it was just a shape, low to the ground, uneven, sitting right in the middle of the road. My father slowed down. The headlights revealed more detail as we got closer. It looked like a baby carriage, old, worn, and tipped slightly to one side, as if someone had dropped it there and left in a hurry. Seeing something like that in the middle of an empty dirt road at night felt wrong right away. It did not belong there. There were no houses nearby, no lights, no signs of life at all. As the car rolled closer, another detail hit us. There was a sound, a crying sound, thin and high, cutting through the quiet night. It sounded like a baby crying. My heart started to pound. Even now, remembering it, I can feel that sudden rush of fear mixed with confusion. A baby carriage and a crying sound in the middle of nowhere made no sense. My mother reacted instantly. Her body moved before her mind could catch up, turning toward the door, reaching for the handle. Everything inside her was focused on the idea that a baby was in danger. My father reacted just as fast, but in a completely different way. He did not stop the car fully. Instead, he shifted gears and pressed the accelerator hard. The car jerked and slid slightly on the loose gravel, the back end kicking out just a bit before the tires caught again. Dust and small stones sprayed up behind us as the engine roared louder. For a split second, everything felt chaotic. My mother was still half-turned, the door not fully closed. The car was moving faster than before, and the headlights swung across the intersection as we turned. In that moment, I looked back through the rear window. What I saw made my blood run cold. From the tall grass on both sides of the road, shapes exploded into motion. For men came rushing out of the darkness, fast and aggressive. They had been hidden perfectly, waiting. In the brief flash of the headlights, I saw what they were holding. Long wooden planks, baseball bats, and other blunt objects raised in their hands. They ran toward the road, toward the place where our car had just been. There was no baby, no helpless child left alone in the dark. The crying sound was a trick, a lure. The carriage was just a prop, placed carefully to make someone stop. The realization hit all of us at once. My father kept driving, pushing the car harder, the engine strained but steady. The road ahead shook and bounced, but he did not slow down. Behind us, the men disappeared back into the darkness just as quickly as they had appeared. The next stretch of road felt endless. Every shadow seemed like another trap. Every rustle in the grass made me expect more people to jump out. My hands were clenched tight, my nails digging into my palms. My mother pulled her door fully shut and sat rigid, staring straight ahead. My brother was silent, his face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. Eventually, after what felt like hours but was probably much less, we saw something familiar. A paved road, a sign, the faint glow of lights in the distance. We found our way back to the highway and pulled into a gas station right at the entrance. The bright lights there felt unreal after the darkness we had just escaped. The normal sounds of cars, pumps, and distant traffic felt comforting in a way I had never felt before. We stayed there for a while, just sitting in the car, letting our nerves calm down. The danger was over, but the shock stayed with us. The understanding of how close we had come to stopping, to getting out of the car, to putting ourselves in a situation we might not have survived, settled in slowly and heavily. Later, after we had collected ourselves, my father explained what had happened to someone at the station. From what he learned, this was not a random event. It was something that had happened before in that area. Groups of criminals used fake situations to make drivers stop in isolated places. Once the car stopped and doors opened, they would rush out, surround the vehicle, and take whatever they could. Sometimes cars were stolen. Sometimes people were beaten. Sometimes it ended much worse. That knowledge made everything even more disturbing. The baby carriage, the crying sound, the perfect timing. It was all planned. Someone had thought it through carefully, knowing exactly how people would react. Knowing that compassion and panic could be used as weapons. We never went back to that region again. Not even during the day. My parents did not talk much about it afterward, but I could tell it had changed them. It definitely changed me. It taught me that danger does not always look dangerous at first. Sometimes it looks helpless. Sometimes it sounds like something that needs saving. Even now, years later, when I drive at night and see something strange on the road ahead, that memory comes back. The dark countryside, the dead trees, the crying sound that was never real, and the figures running out of the grass with weapons in their hands. That night could have ended very differently. If my father had stopped fully, if my mother had stepped out of the car, if we had been just a few seconds slower. Instead, we drove away, shaken but alive, carrying a story that still feels heavy every time I remember it. The ending of that night was clear. We made it home. We were not hurt. Nothing was stolen, but something was taken from us anyway. The feeling that the world is mostly safe if you are careful enough. After that, we all understood that some places hide very real threats, and sometimes the smartest, hardest choice is to leave without looking back. Last year, my girlfriend and I decided to take 2 weeks off and just disappear. We were both in our 20s, both women, both tired in the same deep way that doesn't go away after a normal weekend. We packed my car until it barely shut, threw a cheap tent and sleeping bags in the back, and pointed the hood toward wherever the roads looked emptiest. We weren't chasing anything big or dramatic. We just wanted to live simply for a while, to wake up somewhere new every morning, to cook on a little stove, to fall asleep tired and dirty and satisfied. By the time we reached New Mexico, the trip had settled into a rhythm. Drive for a few hours, hike until our legs burned, find a free campsite on some dusty map or app, set up before dark, eat whatever we had left, fall asleep to wind or insects or distant animals, wake up stiff, do it all again. Being two women alone on the road made us careful, but it didn't make us scared. We trusted our instincts. We trusted each other. Most nights were quiet in a way that felt honest. The first campsite that night was nothing special at first glance. It was one of those free sites tucked way off the highway. No host, no gate, just a wide dirt entrance and a small sign that looked like it hadn't been replaced in decades. The land was flat and open, dotted with low scrub and dry grass. The mountains were far off, dark shapes against a pale sky. There were a few clearings spread out along a looping dirt road. We were the only car there when we arrived, which was normal. Most of the places we stayed were empty. We pulled into the first open spot and shut the car off. The silence hit right away, thick and heavy. No road noise, no distant hum of civilization. Just wind moving through brush and the faint ticking of the engine cooling down. We didn't think much of it. We had felt that silence many times already on the trip. We set up camp quickly. Tent up, bags unrolled, stove out. The sun was already leaning low, turning everything orange and red. I remember feeling calm, grounded, hungry mostly. The smell of our food cooking felt comforting in that empty place. That was when another car showed up. We saw the dust first, then the headlights bouncing as it rolled in. Couple inside, from what I could tell. They didn't stop near us. They drove past our spot and kept going deeper into the campground, farther than I could see. I assumed there were more sites back there. I didn't give it much thought. About 20 minutes later, the same car came back. It slowed near our spot and stopped. I walked over, thinking maybe they were lost or needed directions. The woman leaned out and looked shaken in a way that felt real right away. Not dramatic, just unsettled. She said something about the back of the campground being full of bones. Animal remains scattered everywhere. She asked if we had been back there. I told her we hadn't. She said it looked like a massacre. She asked if they could take the spot next to us. I said yes without hesitation. The idea of neighbors suddenly felt very comforting. Being alone hadn't bothered me until that moment. They pulled into the spot next to ours. For a minute I relaxed, thinking we would all settle in and have a normal night. But they didn't. They got out, looked around, stood still like they were listening for something, then got back into their car. Within a couple of minutes they were gone, driving back out the way they came. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. The quiet rushed back in even harder than before. My girlfriend asked what that was about. I told her what the woman had said. As I finished explaining, I looked down without thinking, just scanning the ground around our feet. That was when I saw the bone. It was big, long white against the dirt. A femur or something close to it. Too large to belong to any small animal. It hadn't been there when we set up, or maybe it had and my brain hadn't registered it. Either way, seeing it suddenly made my stomach drop. It looked old and clean, like it had been there a long time. No blood, no smell, just bone. We stared at it for a while, both of us quiet. I told myself it was probably a cow. There were cattle guards everywhere out there. Ranch land surrounded the campground. It made sense. But the woman's words stayed in my head. We should have left right then. That would have been the smart choice. But curiosity has a way of pretending to be logic. We told ourselves we should at least see what she was talking about so we could make an informed decision. We grabbed headlamps and walked back along the dirt road, deeper into the campground. The road twisted and curved through brush. After about 100 yards, the smell hit us first. That thick, sweet, rotten smell of death that you don't forget once you've experienced it. Then the ground opened up into a wider clearing, and we saw everything. There were animal carcasses everywhere, not just one or two, dozens. Some were scattered, bones pulled apart and bleached by the sun. Others were more intact, hides stretched tight over ribs, eyes long gone. One pile looked like it had once been a fox, fur matted and clumped together. Another body was clearly a deer, still partly wrapped in a black trash bag that had torn open. Flies buzzed lazily. The ground was stained dark in places. It didn't look like a natural kill site. It looked like a dumping ground. Later, days later, we would come up with a reasonable explanation. Roadkill collection. Somewhere they scraped animals off highways and dumped them here instead of burying them. It made sense on paper. But standing there in the fading light, surrounded by that much death, logic didn't help much. All I could think about was what else knew this place existed. Coyotes, mountain lions, bears, anything hungry, anything strong enough to drag bodies around and tear them apart. This was a dinner table in the middle of nowhere. We walked back to our campsite fast. Neither of us said anything, but we didn't need to. The decision was already made. We packed up as quickly as we could, hands shaking, movements clumsy. The sun was almost gone by the time we got everything back in the car. Driving away from that place felt like escaping something, even though nothing chased us. The darkness closed in fast, swallowing the road behind us. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see eyes reflecting back. Nothing did, but my body didn't relax. We drove for a while, both of us quiet, trying to decide where to go next. The maps showed another free campsite about an hour away, still in the middle of nowhere, but marked as part of a national park. That sounded safer, official, maintained. We decided to try it. The road stretched on and on. No other cars, no houses, just old country roads cutting through pastures and open land. The sky went from orange to purple to deep blue. Stars started appearing, sharp and bright. Normally that sight made me feel small in a good way. That night it made me feel exposed. Eventually the pavement turned to dirt. We crossed a cattle guard that rattled under the tires. A sign appeared in the headlights, welcoming us to the national park. I felt a rush of relief. This was real. This was on a map. This couldn't be too bad. We turned left and started up the hill toward the campsite. According to the map, it was only about 2 miles in. The road climbed and curved, the headlights catching thickening brush on either side. The dirt turned rougher, full of rocks and deep ruts. I was driving a fairly new Chevy Cruze, manual transmission, low to the ground. Not built for this. About a quarter mile in, we scraped hard over a rock and got briefly stuck, the car high-centered. My heart jumped into my throat. I eased off, rocked it gently, and we slid free. I told myself it wouldn't get worse. It got worse. Every few feet there was another rock, another trench. The underside of the car scraped again and again, the sound loud and painful. The engine stuttered. I had to keep feathering the clutch to avoid stalling. There was no room to turn around, no space to back up. The road was narrow, brush closing in on both sides, branches scratching the doors. The brush itself changed as we climbed. It looked dead, twisted, pale in the headlights. The shapes it made played tricks on my eyes. Every shadow looked like it could move. The sun disappeared completely behind us. Darkness took over fast. The only light came from our headlights, carving a small tunnel through the night. The rest of the world felt like it had vanished. The drive up that hill felt endless. 30 minutes of pure tension. My hands cramped around the steering wheel. My girlfriend gripped the handle above the door so hard her knuckles were white. Every scrape made me flinch. I kept imagining the car getting stuck for real this time. The oil pan cracked open, the engine dead. No cell service. No one coming by. Just us, stranded in the dark. When we finally reached the top, the road flattened out suddenly. The map said this was the campsite. I slowed and scanned the area. It was barely a clearing. Maybe 10 square feet at most. Just enough room for a car if you parked it perfectly. Dead brush surrounded it on all sides. and directly in front of us, beyond the edge of the clearing, was a cliff. The headlights shone out into nothing, just empty black space dropping away. I couldn't see the bottom. My stomach twisted hard. We sat there in the car, engine idling, both of us breathing shallow. The silence was absolute. No insects, no wind, nothing. After everything we had seen earlier, after the carcasses and the bones, this place felt wrong in a different way. Isolated, trapped, like we had driven into the end of the world. Neither of us wanted to get out of the car. The idea of stepping into that darkness, of turning our backs on the cliff, made my skin crawl. I imagined animals watching from the brush, drawn by the smell of death miles away. I imagined the car slipping forward, rolling silently over the edge. Staying there was not an option. Camping there was unthinkable. Getting out was going to be just as hard as getting in under Skortoggle. We had to turn the car around in that tiny space without going over the cliff or into the rocks. Took a 10-point turn, inch by inch. Tires crunching, brush scraping, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. At one point, the front of the car hung too close to the edge for comfort, and I had to back up blind, trusting my girlfriend's hand signals and my own sense of space. Finally, somehow, the car faced back down the hill. The drive down was worse than the drive up. Gravity worked against us now. Every rock threatened to pull the car forward too fast. I rode the clutch and brakes carefully, terrified of losing control. The headlights shook with every bump, shadows jumping wildly. I didn't breathe normally until we reached the bottom and the road smoothed out again. When we hit pavement, I felt like I could cry from relief. We didn't stop driving until we reached the closest town, hours later. Everything was closed except a Walmart glowing like a beacon. We pulled into the parking lot, parked under a light, and finally shut the engine off. The silence there was different. Distant traffic, refrigeration units humming, other cars, human noise. I had never been so grateful for something so ugly and ordinary. We slept in the car that night, curled awkwardly, exhausted beyond words. Nothing happened. No one bothered us. The world went on. In the morning, the fear felt duller, like a bruise instead of a wound. Logic returned. We laughed a little at ourselves. We talked through what we had seen. The carcasses, the road, the cliff. It all made sense in pieces. But even now, thinking back on it, I remember how it felt in my body more than how it looked. The way the dark pressed in. The way isolation stopped being peaceful and started being dangerous. The way freedom on the road can turn into vulnerability without warning. That trip continued. We camped many more nights. Most of them were beautiful. But that night in New Mexico stayed with me. It taught me that sometimes the smartest ending is not staying to see what happens next. Sometimes the best story is the one where you pack up, drive away, and live to tell it from a safe, brightly lit parking lot. A few years ago, a friend and I went to explore a nearby limestone cave. It was close enough to town that you could hike to the entrance if you wanted, but far enough into the hills that it still felt cut off from everything. The land around it was quiet pasture that turned into scrub and rock, then into a wooded slope that hid the mouth of the cave until you were almost on top of it. I had been there before more than once, but only along the main route that most locals knew about. That part was easy as caves go. Tall enough to walk, dry most of the year, marked by boot prints and old tape from previous explorers. This time was different. I had read about a waterfall somewhere deeper inside, and beyond that, an expansive chamber that opened up like a cathedral. There were no maps that showed exactly how to get there, only vague descriptions and warnings that the route was tight and confusing. That was enough to make it feel like a challenge worth taking. We planned it carefully, at least in the way people think they plan carefully when they are still underestimating what they are walking into. We checked weather, made sure there had been no heavy rain for days, packed headlamps with fresh batteries, backups, helmets, gloves, and a rope long enough to handle any drops we might find. We told someone where we were going and when we expected to be back. All the normal, responsible things. Even with all that, there was still a quiet excitement as we stood at the entrance and switched on our lights. The cave breathed cool air out at us, damp and smelling of stone and earth. It felt familiar at first, almost comforting. The first stretch was easy. The familiar route unfolded exactly as I remembered it. The walls were pale gray and rough, scalloped by water that had flowed there for longer than I could understand. The ceiling arched overhead, high enough that our lights barely touched it in places. The floor was uneven but dry, covered in gravel and old mud that had hardened into ripples. Our footsteps echoed softly, swallowed quickly by the stone. There was nothing scary about this part, nothing that made my pulse rise. It felt like walking through a quiet hallway. We moved slowly, checking landmarks I recognized from before. A bend where the wall narrowed, a low spot where you had to duck, a place where the ceiling dripped steadily into a shallow pool. At each junction, we stopped and looked carefully before moving on. When the familiar route finally ended, it did not announce itself in any dramatic way. There was no sign, no sudden drop. It simply narrowed and twisted until it stopped being the cave I knew. Beyond that point, the walls closed in, and the floor sloped down into darkness. From that point on, we took turns going forward and checking back. The idea was simple. One person would move ahead, test the path, look for drops or squeezes, then signal back that it was safe before the other followed. If there was a place that looked like it might be a point of no return, one of us would stay above with the rope ready. It was slow, careful progress. The cave changed character as we went deeper. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. The sound changed too. Instead of open echoes, there was a dull closeness, like sound was being absorbed by the stone right next to our ears. The first real obstacle was a tight climb down. From above, it looked like a narrow slot that dropped out of sight. When I leaned over the edge and shined my light down, I could see it open slightly after a few feet, but not by much. The rock was smooth from water and bodies that had passed before us. It was not vertical, but close enough that you had to control yourself carefully. The squeeze was like going from the front seat to the back seat in a compact sedan, except vertical. You had to turn your body just right, press your back and shoulders against the stone, and slide down inch by inch. I went first. The rock was cold through my gloves. My helmet scraped softly as I lowered myself. My chest pressed against the wall, my back against the other side. I could feel my breathing change as the space tightened. It was not painful, just firm, like the cave was holding me in place. I took my time, moving one foot, then the other, feeling for holds. When I reached the bottom, I looked up and could see the light from above framed by stone. I felt a small sense of relief when my feet touched solid ground and the space widened enough to stand. The rope came down, then my friend followed, moving slowly, carefully, until we were both at the bottom. From there, the cave continued in a narrow but manageable passage. The floor sloped gently, and the walls showed more signs of water. There were small formations, thin curtains of stone hanging from the ceiling, stubby stalagmites rising from the floor. Everything glistened in our headlamps. The air felt heavier, cooler. I was aware of my breathing now, the sound of it inside my helmet. Then we reached a tunnel that was wide but short. It was not narrow side to side, but the ceiling dropped low enough that crawling was the only option. We stopped, took off our packs, and clipped them to short cords so we could drag them behind us. The floor was muddy in places, gritty in others. I laid flat and pushed forward with my elbows and knees. The rock above my back was close enough that I could feel it brush my helmet when I lifted my head even slightly. We crawled maybe 10 or 15 meters like that. It was not difficult, just uncomfortable. The kind of discomfort you expect in a cave. Still, the closeness started to register. My world narrowed to the circle of light in front of me, the sound of my breathing, the scrape of stone under my gloves. I reminded myself that we knew what we were getting into. That helped, but only a little. When the tunnel finally opened up into a small space where we could stand, it felt like stepping into fresh air even though the air itself had not changed. The space was about the size of a half bathroom. Not big, but big enough to straighten your back and roll your shoulders. The ceiling was uneven and low enough that I still had to be careful, but I could stand. The walls were close but not pressing in. I took a moment to breathe more deeply, to let my body relax. The The path forward from there was easy to see. It was a small square tunnel, the same height as the crawl we had just come through, but wider, maybe 2 meters across. The floor was flat and dusty, with no obvious drops. We joked to ourselves by calling it the coffin crawl, because it felt like crawling into a box. It required us to go one behind the other, no room to pass, no room to turn around easily. The tunnel led straight ahead for a short distance, then made a sharp 90-degree turn. I went first again. As I crawled, I noticed the walls were smoother here, worn down by water or time. My light showed the path continuing past the turn, disappearing into darkness beyond the range of my headlamp. Everything looked level and safe. There were no obvious hazards, no signs of instability. Still, there was something about the way the tunnel held its shape perfectly square that made it feel more confined than the earlier crawl. The ceiling felt closer. The walls felt closer. It was subtle, but it was there. As we continued, it became apparent that the path was getting more narrow, ever so slightly. It was not enough to notice right away. There was no sudden change, no moment where I could say, "This is where it gets tight." Instead, it was a slow realization. My elbows brushed the walls more often. My shoulders had less room. The ceiling pressed a little closer to my helmet. I told myself it was just in my head, that the light and the fatigue were playing tricks on me. At some point, the thought of turning back crossed my mind. I pushed it away at first. We had come this far. The tunnel still felt manageable. But I knew that if we wanted to turn back, we would have to crawl backwards, single file, for however long we had already crawled. That thought settled into my mind and stayed there, heavy and uncomfortable. I tried not to speculate how far we had come. Time and distance feel different underground. Felt like a long way. Eventually, I could see a small opening ahead. It was not large, but it was bigger than the tunnel. Maybe the size of a cramped coat closet, but shorter, maybe 2/3 the height of a normal room. Just seeing that space lifted my spirits. It meant there was a place to stop, a place where we could at least turn around if we decided to go back. I focused on that opening, using it as a goal. Right before that opening, the tunnel tightened abruptly. This was the tightest squeeze I had ever tried in a cave. There was no gradual adjustment this time. One moment, I was crawling with limited but workable space. The next, my shoulders would not fit straight through. I stopped and backed up a few inches, then tried again. The rock did not give. I took a breath and angled my body, placing one arm ahead of me and dragging the other close to my side. I turned my shoulders diagonally and pushed forward inch by inch. The stone pressed against my chest and back at the same time. My helmet scraped loudly now, the sound sharp in the small space. I could feel my breathing speed up, shallow and fast. I forced myself to slow it down, to take measured breaths. Panic would make this worse. Panic would make me bigger in my own mind. I focused on the mechanics of movement. Arm forward, shift weight, drag, inch. As my light illuminated the small opening ahead, I could see more detail. The walls flared slightly, and the ceiling rose just enough to create that closet-sized space. In the center, there was a single stalagmite, thin and pale, rising from the floor like a broken tooth. The walls and the sloped ceiling around it were dotted with small shapes. At first, I did not register what they were. Then I realized they were bats. They were small mouse-eared bats, clinging to the stone in clusters. I had seen bats in caves before. It was not unusual, and under normal circumstances it would not have bothered me. But the context mattered. I was stuck in the tightest squeeze I had ever been in, unable to move forward or back quickly. My friend was behind me, also committed to the passage. There was no room to retreat, no room to stand, just enough space to exist. The bats were still at first, their bodies pressed to the stone, wings folded. Our lights washed over them and they shifted slightly. Then a sound echoed from behind me, the scrape of stone as my friend adjusted position. That was enough. The bats stirred, then lifted off almost at once. Their fluttering filled the space. Wings brushed the walls, the ceiling, my helmet. The sound was a chaotic rush of air and soft impacts. One brushed against my shoulder. Another grazed my helmet. They flew toward the tunnel we were in, toward us, because that was the only way out for them. Their movement was quick and frantic, and even though I knew they were not trying to hurt us, the situation turned it into something deeply unsettling. My heart pounded. The air felt thin, even though I knew it was not. My chest felt tight, trapped between stone and fear. Every instinct in my body screamed to get out, to move, to escape. But there was nowhere to go. I was pinned by the cave, by my own body, by the reality of the situation. I had to stay still enough to let them pass, to not thrash or make things worse. It took a lot of mental control to avoid panicking. I focused on counting breaths, on the feel of the rock under my gloves, on the fact that the squeeze would not get any tighter than it already was. The bats passed in waves, their movement gradually fading as they found their way into the tunnel behind us and away. When the last one brushed past, the space went quiet again, except for my breathing and the distant drip of water. I stayed still for a long moment after that. My muscles trembled with the effort of holding myself in place. Sweat ran down my face, cold against my skin. My headlamp beam shook slightly as I adjusted my grip. I waited until my breathing slowed, until the tight knot in my chest loosened enough that I felt like I could move again. When I finally pushed forward, the rock gave way to the small opening. I slid into it carefully and rolled onto my knees, then crouched. It felt impossibly spacious compared to the tunnel, even though I still could not stand fully upright. My friend followed, emerging with the same careful movements. We were both breathing hard now, the adrenaline still in our systems. The small space was quiet. The stalagmite stood in the center, its surface smooth and worn. The walls were close enough to touch on all sides. I shined my light around, taking it all in. That was when I noticed something out of place on the stalagmite. A small piece of paper, folded and tucked against the stone. It looked old, edges torn, damp but intact. I reached out and took it carefully, half expecting it to crumble. It held together. It was the torn corner of a piece of notebook paper, the blue lines still visible. Written on it in blue pen were the words "Nothing here." The handwriting was simple, almost careless. Someone else had been here before us. Someone else had gone through the same squeezes, the same crawls, and had left this small marker behind. I stared at the note for a long moment, felt heavier than it should have. In that cramped space, deep underground, it carried a strange weight. It was not a warning, not really. It did not say danger or turn back. It simply stated a fact. Nothing here. We looked around the small chamber more carefully after that. There was no other passage forward, no hidden tunnel behind the stalagmite, no sign of the waterfall or the expansive area I had read about. The cave ended there, at least as far as we could see. The walls closed in, solid and unbroken. The note had been honest. The realization settled slowly. We had not found the path we were looking for. We had gone deep, pushed through tight spaces, faced real fear, and arrived at a dead end marked by a scrap of paper. There was a quiet disappointment in that, but also a growing sense of urgency. The way out was the same way we had come in. The same coffin crawl, the same tight squeeze, the same vertical slot. Everything we had just forced ourselves through, we would have to do again in reverse. We rested in that small space longer than we needed to. Part of it was physical recovery. Part of it was mental. I needed to let the tension drain enough that I could face the crawl back without rushing. I looked again at the note, then tucked it back where it had been. Felt wrong to take it. It belonged to the cave now, a quiet record of human presence. When we finally started back, the fear returned, but it was different. It was sharper, more focused. I knew exactly what to expect, and that made it worse in some ways. Crawling backwards through the narrow tunnel required constant awareness of body position. Every movement had to be deliberate. I felt the walls scrape my shoulders, the ceiling press against my helmet. My breathing echoed loudly in my ears. The tightest squeeze was even harder going back. Without being able to see it clearly, I had to feel my way through, inch by inch, trusting that my body would fit the same way it had before. The memory of the bats lingered, even though I knew they were gone. My heart raced anyway. When I finally cleared that spot and felt the tunnel widen slightly, the relief was intense, almost dizzying. The coffin crawl felt endless on the way back. The small standing space beyond it felt like a gift. The low, wide tunnel where we dragged our packs felt almost comfortable. The vertical squeeze felt manageable. Each familiar feature of the cave marked progress toward the entrance, toward open air. By the time we reached the familiar route again, my body ached in ways I had never felt from caving before. My knees were sore, my shoulders bruised, my neck stiff from holding my head at awkward angles. But the worst part was the lingering sense of how close things had come to going wrong. There had been no collapse, no injury, no sudden disaster. Just the steady accumulation of risk and pressure, of spaces that did not care whether we could breathe comfortably or not. When we finally stepped out of the cave into daylight, the contrast was overwhelming. The sky felt huge. The air felt thin and bright and endless. I stood there for a long time, letting the sun warm my face, listening to the distant sounds of wind and insects. The cave entrance behind me was just a dark opening in the rock, quiet and still, giving no sign of what it held inside. We packed up and left without looking back. On the hike out, my thoughts kept returning to that small note on the stalagmite. Nothing here. Felt like more than a statement about the cave. Felt like a reminder. We had gone looking for something hidden and impressive, something worth the risk. Instead, we found a tight space, some frightened bats, and a message left by someone else who had also reached the end and turned back. In the days that followed, the memory stayed with me, not as a dramatic story of escape, but as a quiet, persistent unease. I thought about how easily panic could have taken over in that squeeze, how little room there had been for error. I thought about how deep we had been, how far from help. The cave had not threatened us directly. It had simply existed, indifferent and unyielding. That is what made it scary in the end. There was no monster, no sudden collapse, no supernatural force. Just stone, space, and the limits of the human body and mind. We went in looking for something more, and instead found nothing. And that nothing was enough to remind me how small and fragile we really are underground. I used to run bread for a big bread company, the kind of job that sounds simple until you actually do it. Every workday started before most people even went to bed. My alarm went off around 2 in the morning, sometimes earlier, and my body never really got used to it. I would wake up already tired, with that thick, heavy feeling behind the eyes that never fully went away. I learned to move on autopilot. Shower, coffee that tasted burned no matter how I made it, boots, jacket, keys. The world outside always felt empty at that hour, like I was the only person awake. By 3 in the morning, I was on the road in the delivery truck, the backpack tight with racks of bread. The smell of it soaked into everything. It stuck to my clothes and my hands, sweet and yeasty and a little sour. I drove the same routes over and over, day after day, until they felt burned into my brain. Small towns, remote stores, long stretches of highway with nothing but darkness on both sides. I lived in a rural area surrounded by mountains and forest, so this kind of driving was normal for me. Still, there was something about those early hours that made everything feel off. The land looked different at night. Familiar places felt strange, like they were pretending to be something else. That morning was no different at first. I had already dropped bread at a few stores closer to town. The truck was lighter, the racks rattling a little more when I hit bumps in the road. I was about halfway through a 50-mile drive to the next town, one of the smaller ones that barely counted as a dot on the map. The road out there was 2 lanes, no shoulder to speak of, just asphalt cutting through open land. There were no houses around for a long way in any direction. No porch lights, no barns, nothing. Just darkness, the faint outline of hills, and the road stretching out in front of me under my headlights. The radio barely picked up anything that far out. Mostly static with pieces of late-night talk shows drifting in and out. I turned it down until it was almost nothing. The engine noise and the hum of the tires filled the cab. I remember feeling that foggy mix of boredom and fatigue that comes from doing the same thing every day while being half asleep. Time felt strange. Minutes stretched and shrank without warning. I was alert enough to drive, but not sharp enough to question every thought. That was when I saw something on the side of the road ahead of me. At first, it didn't register as anything specific. Just a dark shape against darker ground. As I got closer, my headlights caught metal. Big metal. A backhoe parked just off the road. That alone was strange. There was no construction going on out there. No signs, no cones, no equipment anywhere else. Just this one machine sitting in the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning. I slowed a little without really thinking about it. My eyes kept going back to it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The backhoe's arm was raised high, much higher than it needed to be just to sit parked. The bucket was lifted up in the air, almost silhouetted against the sky. Something was hanging from it. As the truck rolled closer, the shape became clear. It was a cow. A full-grown cow hanging upside down by its back legs from the bucket. His body was split open. I could see the pale shine of flesh and the dark, wet look of blood even from the road. Blood was dripping down, splashing onto the dirt beneath it. The smell hit me through the open vents a second later. That heavy iron smell that you never forget once you know it. I grew up around ranching. I had seen animals butchered before. I knew what dead livestock looked like. Because of that, I didn't panic the way someone else might have. There was no sudden screaming thought in my head. No urge to slam the brakes. Instead, my brain went into the strange calm mode where it tried to explain things. Maybe a rancher had a cow go down. Maybe he was processing it early to beat the heat. It was odd, sure, but not impossible. Then I noticed the man. He was standing under the raised bucket, close to the hanging cow. He was covered in blood. Not just splattered, but soaked. His clothes were dark with it, his arms, his chest. Even his face looked smeared. He had one hand resting on the cow, like he was steadying it. When my headlights hit him fully, he turned his head and looked straight at me. That was the moment I should have kept driving. Instead, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I slowed down more. Part of it was curiosity. Part of it was that ranching instinct that tells you to stop and see if someone needs help. Another part was just the fog of being up at that hour, making bad ideas feel normal. I pulled the truck over onto the edge of the road and rolled to a stop next to him. The engine idled loudly in the quiet. My headlights lit up the whole scene. The cow, the blood, the man. He looked at me and smiled, wide and easy, like this was the most normal thing in the world. He lifted one hand and waved. I waved back without thinking. I leaned slightly out the window and made a gesture that was meant to ask if he needed help. No words, just a raised hand and a nod toward the cow. He stared at me for a second, then suddenly started laughing. Not a small chuckle, full body laughter. He bent forward, slapping his knee, his shoulders shaking. Blood flung off him in tiny dark drops as he moved. Something about that broke whatever thin layer of sense I still had left. I started laughing too. It came out of me fast and loud, like pressure being released. Here I was, half asleep, sitting in a bread truck on an empty road, laughing with a stranger covered in blood who was gutting a cow with a backhoe at 3 in the morning. The absurdity of it hit me all at once. For a few seconds, maybe longer, we were just two guys laughing in the dark, the sound carrying way too far in the empty land. Then the reality of the situation finally pushed its way through the fog in my head. I looked at him again, really looked, at the blood on his hands, at the way the cow hung there open and heavy, at the fact that there was no ranch house anywhere nearby, no lights, no sign of where he had come from or where he was going. Just him, the machine, and the dead animal. A cold feeling started in my stomach and spread out through my chest. My laughter died off hard, like someone had flipped a switch. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct I had suddenly screamed that I did not belong there. Without another gesture or pause, I hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires kicking gravel as I pulled back onto the road. In the side mirror, I saw him straighten up. He was still smiling. He lifted his hand again in a slow wave as my headlights slid off him and the backhoe disappeared into the darkness behind me. I drove fast, faster than I should have on that road. The truck rattled and swayed, bread racks clanking in the back. My heart pounded hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights or the shape of that backhoe somehow following me, even though I knew how ridiculous that was. The road stayed empty. As the miles passed, my breathing slowly started to even out. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a deep, shaky exhaustion. That was when my brain started replaying the scene in detail, filling in gaps and asking questions it hadn't asked at the time. Why was he there? Why that spot so far from any buildings? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. If you own cattle, you usually don't haul heavy equipment miles away from your land just to butcher one animal on the side of the road. You do it where you have tools, light, water, where you can clean up, where you won't be seen. The idea formed slowly, then settled heavy in my chest. That cow probably wasn't his. I imagined him driving that backhoe out into the middle of nowhere under cover of darkness, picking a spot where no one would be around, killing someone else's animal, hanging it up, gutting it right there, planning to load it into the front bucket and drive it back home piece by piece. All of it happening while the rest of the world slept. The thought of how far he might have had to drive like that made my skin crawl. Miles of dark roads with a dead cow hanging off the front of his machine, blood dripping the whole way. No idea how long he had been out there before I came along. No idea what he would have done if I had stayed longer, or if I hadn't laughed it off the way I did. By the time I reached the next town, the sky was just starting to lighten at the edges. The store lights were on, bright and normal. I backed the truck into the loading area and started my routine, unloading bread, scanning invoices, stacking shelves. My hands shook a little at first, but the familiar motions helped settle me. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Not that day. Not for a long time after. Part of me thought no one would believe it. Another part felt like saying it out loud would make it more real, give it more power than it deserved. But it stayed with me. Every time I drove that stretch of road after that, I looked toward the spot where the backhoe had been. In daylight, it looked harmless. Just dirt and grass. No sign anything had happened there. No blood. No tracks. Nothing. That almost made it worse, knowing how easily something that disturbing could vanish without a trace. Over time, the sharp edge of fear dulled, but the memory never went away, turned into something heavier and quieter. A reminder of how strange people can be when you stumble into their world by accident. How thin the line is between a normal night and something deeply wrong. I kept running bread for a while after that, but I was never quite the same on those early morning drives. I stopped pulling over for anything that wasn't clearly broken down or marked. I kept my doors locked. I trusted my instincts more when they told me to keep moving. Years later, I still think about that man sometimes. I think about his laughter, how easy it came to him, how comfortable he was doing what he was doing out there in the dark. I wonder how many times he had done it before and how many times since. I wonder if anyone ever caught him, or if he's still out there somewhere, waiting for the roads to empty and the world to go quiet again. Nothing supernatural happened that night. No monsters. No ghosts, just a man, a machine, and a dead animal on a dark road. And that, somehow, is what makes it stick with me, because it really happened.